Hi, everybody, and welcome back to the Right on Crime podcast. My name is Britt Allen, and if you're new to the show, welcome. Right on Crime is a national campaign of the Texas Public Policy Foundations, and we advocate for conservative criminal justice solutions that result in less crime, fewer victims, and safer communities. And today, I'm really excited to have a really special guest on with us. She is who we call future Madam President, but she's also for now our Idaho State Director, Molly Lenty. Hi, Molly.
Hello. Hi, Brett. Thanks for having me on today.
Anytime. Good to have you back. It's been a while. How are things? What's going on?
Things are great. Yeah, things are going well.
Yeah, you're absolutely not short of things to do right now. I know you're super busy. You're in the middle of session. You've got other projects. So we really appreciate you taking time out of your day to chat with us. I'm really excited about the conversation we're going to have today because it's something you've been working a lot on. It's something you're very passionate about. So I say we just dive right in. My first question is, it's all around reentry and second chance hiring, which is something that's so important for public safety, but particularly in Idaho. So for people who might not be familiar with the situation in Idaho, could you tell us a little bit about what's happening with incarceration rates right now and why people should be paying attention if they're not already?
Yeah, absolutely. Here in Idaho, our prison population has quietly reached a historic milestone. We recently surpassed about 10,000 incarcerated individuals, which puts our system roughly at 123% of its designed capacity. And what's really interesting is that growth isn't happening because crime is skyrocketing. It's actually happening, Idaho's overall crime rate has actually been declining over the years, and we're seeing our incarceration rate at the level that it's at because of a combination of factors. More people are being sentenced to prison for longer sentences, and fewer people are leaving the prison system. Either through parole or through other pathways. And so it's putting a strain on the system as a whole. It's impacting our taxpayers, it's impacting our workforce, and it's impacting the stability of our communities. So when the system is growing faster than the infrastructure supporting it, we have to start asking smarter questions about how we manage public safety here in Idaho.
Yeah, no kidding. You sent me an interesting stat that Idaho's prison population reached about 10,000 people, which is, I think you've just said, 123% of capacity. So what does that level of growth actually mean for taxpayers and communities if we're getting down to the specifics?
Yeah, the cost to have an individual incarcerated is about $85 per day.
Wow.
So when you cascade that across thousands of people per day, across many different facilities, and many of those that are incarcerated are being housed in jails and multiple facilities that don't meet what our system is currently built for, those costs really do cascade even further than what it is originally designed for. And so we're not able to provide what the system is originally intended for from a treatment perspective. We also have people that are in the system for far longer than what their sentence is intending as well. So we've got a system that is feeling the constraint, it's feeling the pressure, and we're not able to truly provide a pathway for success when they are ready for reentry back into society.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting. And I know I've only been to Idaho a handful of times, and it was a long time ago. It's a beautiful
We're
state.
going to get you back over here.
Twist my arm. I'm down to go anytime. And I know we have plans for that soon. But that being said, Idaho is also a largely rural state. So how does the rural reality affect the reentry process for people who are leaving prison?
Yeah, that's a huge factor for us. You know, when you look at a lot of those people that are incarcerated, that are coming from rural areas of our state, when they are preparing for reentry, there are major factors that are barriers for them: transportation, housing, employment, Transportation being one of those key factors. Even being able to get to meetings that they might need to have with their parole or probation officer to check in with them in order to get to job interviews. Just the very basic things that we take for granted on a daily basis are major, major barriers for somebody that is trying to successfully re-enter society, where, they're trying to overcome some bad decisions that were made.
Yeah. And like you said, it's something we take for granted every day. It's so easy for us to pop out our iPhone and grab an Uber, but that's not the reality of a lot of people leaving prison. It's, and the rural component when, we all live in cities or at least suburbs. That's a serious consideration. When we're talking about barriers, when someone leaves prison, there are a lot of barriers that comes just like later in life as they're trying to rebuild, kind of coming back into society. Can you talk a little bit about what those barriers might look like?
Sure. I think programs differ from different parts of the state, and every state runs into this. I think especially for rural states, but even here in the Boise metro area, there are limited resources that are available. Here in Idaho, there are only 600 beds that are available for people who are reentering society. So, they have the opportunity to better their lives, to make better decisions, to start over, to engage in second chance opportunities, to find gainful employment, to find, if they've taken advantage of educational opportunities, maybe workforce type of programs while they have been incarcerated. And then they have the challenge of finding sober housing, finding a bed at a sober housing facility. They're very, very limited in a metro area. And then you start looking at the more rural areas across the state, and that becomes even more challenging. You layer on transportation. You layer on a lot of those wraparound services. Faith-based community is a major, resource for a lot of reentry and second chance types of programming that are available for those who are reentering society, but even those are very, very limited, and funding that is available for programs like that is limited. So for a state like Idaho, it's really, really important for these programs to be working together, to be working in tandem, for our state leaders, for our lawmakers to be aware that there is this population that is reentering society. 95% of those that are incarcerated will be reentering society. And so this is a population that we need to be prepared for in order to provide them with the resources and the pathways in order to find success. And there's plenty of stories of very, very, very successful reentry once they have the access to the resources available to them.
Yeah. And I'm so glad you referenced that stat. It's one that we love at Right on Crime because it paints us and it paints a picture, but it confronts us with a very serious reality that this is a population that's going to live amongst us again. They are going to be our neighbors. They're going to be our coworkers. They could be around our kids. And so it's what kind of neighbors and coworkers do we want around us? So I'm so glad that you mentioned that. And, you mentioned this at the beginning of the podcast, but a lot of people assume that most people who return to prison, they do it because they have committed new crimes, but the numbers do tell a more nuanced story. So could you explain to the audience a little bit about the new charges versus technical violation difference there?
Yeah. A new charge would be a new crime that they've committed that would be separate from their original sentence, their original, reason for them being incarcerated. And unfortunately, new charges, can happen and they can find themselves back down a unfortunate pathway. But there are technical violations that can happen as well. And unfortunately, for a lot of people who have reentered society and they may be doing everything that they can within their power to be on that pathway for success. And because they don't have transportation, they may miss, a check-in with their advisor that they're supposed to be checking in with as far as terms of their parole or probation. They might miss any number of different supervision type of a technical advisory expectation. Anything like that can send them back into the system. Sometimes there are requirements for them to maintain employment. Sometimes there's so many layers to these expectations for them to be successful as part of their reentry into society. And that's where it's so important for employers who are educated and want to be a part of the success for reentry to be a part of that solution. And there's so many successful examples of how employers can help be a part of that journey for individuals who have reentered society and who have that story of, making a couple of bad decisions can land you in a, really unfortunate place. And, you do your time and you've got the opportunity to write your life and to, get back on track. But you've got responsibilities that you need to check in on and make sure that you don't land yourself with a technical violation where you end up back in prison and you've got to start the clock all over again. And, we see that happen. And unfortunately, for some people, it takes a couple of rounds of that before they're able to be in a situation where they're able to have the right supports around them that ensure that they're on that right pathway and they're on that right track. We're not talking about committing a new crime. That's a choice, right? We're talking about situations that pop up. And we know, we all talk about in life, well, something happens, right? You get a flat tire. Inevitably, there's two more things that are going to happen where, okay, well, 3 strikes, we know that now things are going to get better. Well, that's fine if we're not in a situation where we're overcoming something major like reentering society and trying to get our life back on track. Usually it's something like a flat tire or something with your engine goes out, and then your air conditioner needs replaced. These are major issues.
I'm glad you mentioned that because, I feel like, especially for someone like me, who before I joined Right on Crime, I wasn't all that familiar with the criminal justice system, right? My assumption is that if you're in prison, you did something bad, you're a danger to society. And that's still true, right? But I've never thought about beforehand the idea that, like, there's also a lot of people who did have a technical mistake. There are days, even if I look at my to-do list and it's like, oh, I didn't shoot off this email, or dang it, I missed my doctor's appointment. I mean, that's just because life happens sometimes, but I don't go to prison for those things. So I appreciate you laying that out. One thing we also consistently see when we go across the country is that employment is one of the strongest predictors of successful reentry. So why does having a job make such a difference, in your own words?
There are, I'm going to go down 2 paths with this because I think there's 2 things that are really, really important. It creates structure for someone who is, really trying to get their life on track. It creates that structure of a daily routine and sense of accountability, sense of worth. A lot of times it provides the opportunity for upskilling, for learning new trade or new skills within a new job or a new industry. There's so much opportunity. They've got the ability to earn a paycheck and be a part of society, be a part of community. But on the other side of it, they also build that community for themselves. And depending upon the type of job and the type of employer that they would be joining, there also is the opportunity to have that support system. And we see a lot of success with second chance employers if they have somebody within their organization that is familiar with second chance hiring. They understand the importance of accountability, one, but also the support system that is needed. Believing in that person, but holding them accountable as well. And we've seen so many successes in the opportunity to become a second chance hiring business.
Yeah, absolutely. So tell me a little bit then about, from a purely business perspective, why should employers care about second chance hiring? Especially in the job market now. I mean, I feel like everybody's hiring and, people say it's so hard to find jobs, but it seems like everybody's hiring. So tell me about why an employer should care about this.
Yeah, workforce and workforce pipeline is something that, personally, professionally, with my background, I am really passionate about. I've worked in and around education pipeline for many years. I've got a business background. I just did the corporate thing for about 25 years. So this is a space that is near and dear to my heart, and learning about the opportunity around reentry and second chance hiring. And the more that I saw that was happening at the national level around second chance hiring and applying that to the needs here locally in Idaho, when we look at workforce pipelines, we know there's a workforce cliff that we're facing at the national level. Applying that here in Idaho, when you look at manufacturing, when you look at skilled trades, when you look at a lot of these different businesses that are desperately needing employees, and you look at the population, we talked about how 95% of those that are incarcerated are going to be reentering society. Well, they're reentering society and they're looking for employment. They're looking for an employer who is wanting to invest in them, who's wanting to believe in them, who's wanting to give them a second chance. And the majority of people in Idaho, majority of business owners, because I know business owners, I've been involved in our chambers of commerce. I've been involved in a lot of these organizations and, working on initiatives with our Department of Commerce, with all these different, state agencies for years. I'll tell you, the one thing that we don't talk about is our incarceration rate. I shared that we're at 123% of our capacity. That's not something that we talk about. We're certainly not talking about it at our dinner table conversations. We're not talking about it at our business meetings. We're not sharing that we have the highest women's incarceration rate in the country, but it's true. And we can sit around and we can lament that, or we can talk about how we can be a part of the solution. Mm-hmm. And how we can help build these workforce pipelines for these individuals who are looking for opportunity. I sit on the board of trustees for our local community college, and we partner heavily with Department of Corrections, and we partner heavily with a lot of these skilled trades where we're backfilling these positions that are needing to be upskilled for. So there's need, there's opportunity. Why don't we connect the dots? Why don't we connect these conversations? And so we've recently launched an effort, and we'll be talking, I know, a little bit more about that, but there's so much excitement here just recently about bringing these conversations together. And now we are having conversations around the dinner table. We are looking at some of our numbers, and instead of pointing the finger at some of these numbers, we're actually pulling the thumb and saying, how can I be a part of the solution? How can I help? And that's the exciting part.
Yeah, that's extremely exciting. I'm excited to dig more into that. But first I want to address what kind of feels like the elephant in the room when we talk about second chance hiring. And it's a valid one, right? But there's sometimes hesitation from employers about hiring someone with a record, right? And again, that's very understandable. But what would you say to business owners who might be unsure about giving someone a second chance?
I love this question. And I also will be transparent and say, I don't have all the answers, because, it is a risk, mm-hmm. right? There is some risk. There's a risk every time you're hiring somebody new into your business. My husband and I, we own a company. And we are in a skilled trade company. There's a risk every time we bring a new employee into our company, because we know that employee is going to be going out and meeting with customers that we care about. That's your brand. That's your business. Those are people that you care about. You wouldn't own that company if you didn't care. But I also know, and the statistics prove this, but I also know, and I know so many people who are success stories, and I'm so proud to know them, where these are really, really, really good people. They just needed somebody to believe in them and give them a chance. So you've got to put that all together. We have this conversation, and we do have a number of business leaders that have come around the table that are from a variety of different industries. And this is an exact question that has come up saying, how do we challenge this stigma around second chance hiring? And there's been some really important work that's taken place at the national level. And there's a national Second Chance Business Coalition that has been coordinated by very well-known business leaders from across the country. And, Jamie Dimon from JP Morgan is one of the leaders, one of the co-founders of this effort. And I think it's really important to share this because here we have one of the, major financial service companies who has made a major statement in saying that a percentage of their new hires must be formerly incarcerated.
Mm.
That's not only huge for them as a major national financial services company. I'll tell you that is huge for me to say in a room of business leaders to derail that stigma, for them to then be open to, well, if it's okay for a business like this, and if it's okay for a leader that's well known like Jamie Dimon to say that it's okay to have somebody that is formerly incarcerated to be welcome into their company and to be willing to take that risk, then I should be open to that as well. And that's been huge for a lot of the conversations that we're having here locally, as well as some of the local examples that we have as well. And we've got some very influential business leaders that have stepped up and said, this is what leadership looks like. And this is what it's meant for our own businesses. And it's been wonderful. We are very fortunate and very blessed to have leaders like we do who believe in second chances.
Yeah, 100%. I think the success stories and the anecdotes, they're so important, right? To really showcase like why this works. But if you even just speak to the data, like the data itself shows how, somebody who is given a second chance really is a more loyal, more hardworking employee than the average employee. They're also way more likely to stick around for the long haul, which is going to decrease turnover. And I know that that's obviously very important to a business owner. So I love that you guys are having those conversations. I think it also leads really well into this next question, though, about, there's a misconception that second chance hiring is strictly about compassion. And while that is perhaps a component of it, it's actually like the less important component. There's a really strong public safety argument here. So how, in your words, would you say stable employment actually helps to reduce recidivism in our communities?
Well, we know that stable employment is one of the leading factors that deters recidivism. For somebody who has stable employment, that helps to ensure, they've got routine, they've got something to ensure that they are working towards. A lot of times it also includes the ability for upskilling or education in a career field. A lot of times, the job that they get hired on for has growth opportunity. But it's that support system that is the wraparound for them. Statistics also show, and I'm glad that you brought this up, Britt, it also shows that in comparison, for an employer to hire a second chance employee for a role, statistically, they are far more loyal. They stay in that position much, much longer and do far better than if they were to hire for that same position, anyone just, generally, as a general response, off the street for that same role. They are so much more appreciative for the opportunity. and for an employer to hire them knowing that they are a second chance hire and choosing to invest in them. The statistics prove it. Anecdotally, the stories prove it. I know people directly, either the employers who have the stories to tell and the successes to share, or the people themselves who have worked their way up. We've got a gentleman who is now the general sales manager, who his mom, when he served multiple felony counts, when he got out of prison, his mom actually called the finance director at a car dealership and said, please hire my son. The guy's like, I don't even know who this is, but his mom called, so I'm going to hire him. And yeah, it's a pretty cute story.
Power of a mother.
So Joey shows up on the car lot, and this finance manager's like, well, I don't know what I'm going to do with them. Fast forward a number of years, and now he's the general sales manager, and they have an informal second chance hiring program. And he is just one of the best spokespeople around the value. They're very structured. They have really, high expectations. And he says, not every employee works out, but the majority do. And they hold each other accountable. And, they have success stories as the employer. They have employees who are the success stories. And as the employee, he wants to tell the story to other employers because he can see the value and he knows the difference that it made in his life, and now the ripple effect that it's making in other people's lives by having somebody that believed in him.
Yeah, no kidding. And I think, and I'm so glad you mentioned that, right? That's just a human experience, right? We all, if you're a human being on planet Earth, you know the value of being given a second chance. You know what it feels for somebody to believe in you, and how that impacts your behavior and your performance in everyday life. So especially for, this population of people, the stakes are a lot higher. And so the data proves it's because they are, but also like they're going to do something with that second chance. So I'm really glad that you shared that story. I wish Joey nothing but the best.
We'll get Joey on a podcast because his story is so inspirational, and he's somebody you can't help but just fall in love with. And he's pretty amazing.
Well, and he's giving second chances to other people, right? So he understands as somebody who was given the second chance, but he also sees the impact of giving others that second chance and how it's probably impacted his business. So as the comms girl, we'll put a pin in that and we'll be sure to bring him on. But I want to go back to something also that you referenced at the beginning of the show, and that's the cost of incarceration. So you mentioned it's about $85 per person per day in Idaho, which is a lot of dollars. So can you speak a little bit to the cost of helping someone succeed after release? Like, what does that tell us about where we make an investment and why one way is maybe smarter than another?
Yeah, the cost, well, we could even boil that down, more to cost of prevention in a lot of ways. And if you think about it from a recidivism standpoint, investing in ensuring that people have the resources to ensure that they're not returning to prison, even if they are avoiding technical violations and return, because the cost to house them in prison, whether it's a first-time offense, if they're reoffending with a new charge, or it's a technical violation, the cost to house them in prison is extremely, extremely expensive. We need to first educate our community around our high incarceration rates. The majority of Idahoans have no idea that we have such high incarceration rates. And then you boil that down to they have no idea why we have such high incarceration rates. Prevention is always, a lot less expensive. So if we can look at how do we support our law enforcement, how do we support our reentry service program providers? How do we support our Idaho correctional industry partners? Our reentry programs are run through, there's a hybrid role between our Department of Labor and Department of Corrections, as well as Idaho Correctional Industries. And they each run workforce programs. And part of this coalition that we've created brings together business leaders, as well as the correctional partners and the workforce partners, as well as housing leaders, so that we can look at how do we really wrap our arms around those that are reentering society to ensure that we're really supporting them in the ways that they need it the most. Not just central for those that live here in the Boise metro area, but also in the rural parts of our state. We also are running into something that I know that other states are running into as well. That's not unique to just here in Idaho, but we have a number of companies that are located here in Idaho, whether they're packaging companies. We're a very ag-heavy state. We're also we're growers, as well as cattle. And a lot of our workforce programs rely on companies that are either nationally owned or internationally owned. And if they are either, if an individual is currently incarcerated or they're transitioning for reentry into society and they're involved in a workforce program, if it is a company that has a policy, it's usually an international policy against indentured servitude, they might see them as being currently incarcerated where they're being forced to work versus it being an option where they choose to work. And so a lot of those workforce pathways are not available to them. Mm-hmm. And that's something that we're also looking to help change the narrative on, so that we can unlock a lot of those pathways and remove those barriers so that they have access to those workforce type of opportunities. Because in the rural parts of the state, that's a lot of the larger employers.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, speaking of changing the narrative, you teased this a little bit earlier, but you are helping to launch a Second Chance Business Coalition in Idaho. So what is the coalition? Why bring together business leaders and corrections officials around this issue? Just spill the tea.
Yeah, it's, I'd mentioned that we're really not talking about this. We're not talking about the numbers. We're not talking about it in a solutions-driven way. We know we've got these really high incarceration rates. We know that we've got, we're very, we are very tough on crime. That's something here in Idaho, very focused on public safety. And I know that that's something that's really important to us here at Right on Crime as well. But with that in mind, we need to make sure that we're really focused on recidivism and how do we keep these people from reentering prison. And that means we need to have all of those wraparound resources. So how do we get the business community involved? How do we ensure that we have these workforce pipeline programs that are created? How do we dispel the fears around hiring these second chance type of workforce jobs? And I've learned that if you want to get something done, you bring some really smart people to the table. You find some leaders that can help influence, bring in some other really smart people to the table, and you don't be afraid to ask. And so we've got two phenomenal chairs. Tommy Alquist, who owns a large development company in town, and Dwayne Sessions, who's the president of a large auto dealership. And so they are co-chairing the Second Chance Business Coalition. We've got market leaders from a lot of the big national companies that are at the table around this group as well. A lot of well-known national businesses as well as local businesses from every industry, manufacturing, construction, financial services, you name it. The best part, and I love this, is that every time that I've reached out to somebody and I've said, we're bringing together this coalition, it's going to be focused on second chance hiring. They either say, one of my best employees is formerly incarcerated. I'd love to be there. Or they say, I really don't know anything about it, but I'd love to be there. Every single conversation, somebody's body language changes and they lean in. I kid you not, Britt. It has been one of the most amazing things. And so for our initial meeting, it was our soft launch of this. We were in this beautiful conference room and every chair was filled and everyone was leaning in. And so we had leaders from the business community and we had leaders from the corrections community, workforce community, and more people that were knocking on the door to be at the next meeting. And so we're meeting again next week. We have a tour of 3 workforce locations within the correction system later on in the month. And we'll be meeting monthly as we tackle some of these big, hairy, audacious goals as we wrap our arms around what is needed for this target population and bringing more businesses to the table, informing the business community. We're going to be doing an employers forum. The chambers of commerce were there at our initial meeting. They've wrapped their arms around and said, absolutely, we're at the table. We know our businesses are interested in this. I went and was at the Building Contractors Association lunch this week. 90% of the room, we had somebody speaking on a panel there, but 90% of the room raised their hands and said they were interested in having somebody participate in a hiring fair. So we've got a lot coming up. There's just so much work to be done and the timing is right. And we've got jobs to fill and we've got really, people that need jobs. They need a second chance.
Yeah.
They need people to provide them that opportunity.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you mentioned tough on crime. Sometimes we talk about public safety till we're blue in the face here at Right on Crime. That is our number one concern and value is what is it going to take to make communities safer? Like that is the right of every American. And when it comes to second chance hiring, there's just nothing more tough on crime than making sure that people who come out of prison don't reoffend, don't re-victimize, don't come back. And then just the second fold of this is how much it does help the economic, status of our communities and our businesses. So I'm very excited about this coalition. We're all rooting you on, and we can't wait to see all of the ways it changes the narrative in Idaho.
I'm not bashful about also sharing that, this is the first step. We know that there is some barriers as it relates to credentialing and, alternative sentencing and things like that, where, having the highest incarceration rate for women, some things like that are absolutely going to surface when we really dig in and look at how do we create the best pathways for those that are incarcerated, for them to transition back into society. There are some really, really phenomenal things that state directors from Right on Crime, things that they've been able to do in our sister states from around the country that I can't wait to introduce here in Idaho. And having our business community really wrap their arms around first identifying where those needs are, and then being alongside to help champion where we need to turn the dials on some of those unintended impacts, because I think that's what we're facing, or where there's some unintended impacts on some of the credentialing barriers that I have no doubt are going to surface as we do engage more of our businesses in second chance hiring.
Yeah.
There's just, some of those that we need to tweak a little bit. So I'm excited to really lean in on reentry and second chance hiring. And I know some of my peers in neighboring states, I'm excited to highlight a lot of the great work that they're doing and bring some of those best practices here in Idaho. And excited to get you out here too, because I know that there's a lot of storytelling for best practices that we're doing here that we just need to surface and celebrate and tell those stories of a lot of good work that's happening here in Idaho
Yeah.
around criminal justice and things that we've got some pretty cool stuff. We've got a phenomenal director at our Department of Corrections, and she's doing some pretty creative things with, not a lot of resources, but doing what she can do when she's got some really big challenges ahead of her.
Yeah. Well, you know me, I'm a dog with a bone when you mention storytelling, so we'll be sure to set it up. I wanted to ask also, if Idaho gets this right, if more businesses step into second chance hiring, tell me what that could mean for public safety, the workforce, the future of communities. Like in 10 years, if we get this right, what does Idaho look like?
Well, I don't think it can happen unless you say it, right? You got to put it out there. I think that we could absolutely see a decline in our incarceration rates as we see them today. I love Idaho being on the top spot in a lot of different lists around the country, and I'm really proud of a lot of those lists. But serving in that top spot for women's incarceration rates is definitely not one of those lists that I want to be on. So being able to change that would be great. Being able to lower our overall incarceration rate, 123% of capacity is just it's not acceptable. It's a burden on our taxpayers. Not being able to provide the resources that individuals need as they're preparing for reentry and going through reentry, and ultimately finding themselves back in prison because of a violation. We can do better than that. We can find them meaningful jobs. We can reunite families. We can, I'll even be as bold to say as we can make an impact on our foster care numbers by being able to keep families intact. Like, let's think about this even bigger. How can we make an impact on families, not just for this generation, but broader than that as well?
Yeah, I love a long-term vision. Molly, this has been such an amazing conversation. I want to ask if there is just like anything we didn't get to, anything you really, really hope that the audience takes away from this conversation, what do you hope that it would be?
I think we touched on a lot of things, Brett, and
It was great.
Yeah. I think we touched on a lot of things. The only thing that I think that maybe a parting thought is that I talked about how we have a lot of opportunity here in Idaho, and I say that in a positive way, but I also am very aware that there's a big challenge ahead of us. And for many years I wore the hat as a funder. And I am also very aware that we don't have a whole lot of, I say, tall buildings in Idaho. We don't have a lot of corporate headquarters. And in order to get things done and create programs, it takes money. And that is one of those challenges that here in Idaho, it's going to absolutely need to be people working together. And it's going to absolutely need to be collaboration and surfacing that there is a need, and people owning that problem and not pointing fingers. And I said it earlier, pulling the thumb in a way that we say, let's be a part of the solution. And like everything in life, you've got two choices. Am I going to be a part of the solution, or am I going to be a part of the problem? And at this pivotal time, I think we all have opportunity to be a part of the solution. And the solution in front of us right now is, how can we be and support reentry for those that are going to become a part of our community again.
Yeah. Molly, you're amazing. And I hope one day you do become Madam President. But in the meantime, you are right here with Right on Crime. So if anybody wants to keep up with you, your work, Second Chance Hiring, where can they find you?
Absolutely. Email me, mlenty@rightoncrime.com. I would love any ideas on best practices that are happening in your local communities. If you are an employer here in Idaho, please reach out to me. I'd love to loop you in on the work that we're doing around second chance hiring. Get a hold of me. I'm on LinkedIn.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you guys so much for joining us for another episode of the Right on Crime podcast. If you do want some more information to keep up with Molly, the incredible work she's doing on second chance hiring, go to our website, rightoncrime.com, or you can find us on anywhere you check out your social media platforms. We've got lots of content going out around everything our directors are doing. And until then, we will see y'all next time.